Over here on the Cedar Bayou Flat, the runway area, third chain, Cedar Dugout, all this area up in here. Got all the little submerged little islands. A few of them sticking out. If you've run through there, you'll see the little birds standing up there on top of them. Pelicans hang out on those areas. A lot of bait working in our system. You know, we've this past week with that disturbance that's down in the lower Gulf around the Yucatan, we've gotten more water in our system than what we normally should have this time of year, based strictly because of that. But that gives us opportunities to fish different areas and fish them differently. So, and even areas like here on the third chain or the dugout, it sets up differently for you because you got more water in the system, so you can approach it differently. So it gives us opportunities we typically would not have when we have just our normal tides. So working these areas that way, you know, you get inside the bar here, there's a nice little drop edge there. So we just took our time working those edges, working the deeper cuts and the little coves that are back off in here, that worked around all those, worked the little islands. The third chain islands worked around those. Of course, some of those areas, even on a normal tide, are pretty deep on the drop off. So we kind of had to push up a little closer on the shore to be able to fish that. Typically, we were fishing those again where, you know, our heat is somewhat returned back, so we're getting back in the mid 90s again. Water temps that's starting out in the upper 80s. And some areas are creeping to the low 90s, so that deeper water later in the day has been pretty beneficial for us. We've been, fishing that typically should be about a 2.5 to 4 foot water, but this past week it's been around 5 or 6 feet in some areas. So it's a little bit more difficult to weight it. And you can get on either side of it. You can get on depending on where your wind was coming from. We had a southeast breeze, had a little bit of east breeze ever so often. But you fish the windward side of it or fish down it, be parallel with it, and we just kind of work those edges around these little islands here. The same over here in Belding's Lake, Belding Reef on this other side. You had the same opportunities, especially on the day that we had an east wind primarily. So that really set this up that we could sit people on either side of that shell bar and work right down that shoreline all the way to the backside of Belding Lake, all this area back in here. And we, locate some fish up and down that shore. Not everywhere was holding fish, but it gave us opportunities. We were fishing primarily that moonset minor in the mornings, and we're on the backside of that big moon now, so we're in those transition days / wild card days. So you really have to kind of adjust your box somewhat. Primarily, if you could do this, you could have 3 different kind of boxes. You have a new moon box, you have a full moon box, and then you have your transition / wild card day box. So if you're happen to be fishing in one of those series and one of those time frames, you just grab that box and roll with it. And you don't have to do a whole lot of thought process with y'all. Just a little pre-work, just making sure everything is in it that you need for that particular situation in that setup. But in the wild card days, we try to have all different kinds of profiles, different colors and stuff. Water clarity's been pretty good for the most part. We haven't had super big winds by any means. The mornings have been very calm for the most part. Anywhere from 5 to 8 miles to 10 miles an hour. It's been very, very doable. Even crossing open bodies of water and getting to some of these areas and fishing these things, it's been pretty good. And like I say, it allows us to really set up and work these reefs like that. We're still finding fish on the reefs, starting to still hard packed sand area, little squishy mud here and there. You're starting to see some fish show up there. Redfish, they're migrating either way because they're getting ready to push out to the Gulf here in about another month and a half. So we're starting to see little pods, little schools in these back lakes, now on these fronts of these shorelines. Nothing super big that I've come across yet. They've been anywhere from probably a 8 to 25 fish pod or school of those in certain areas that we've noticed and had a shot at them from here and there, but they're all seem to be pretty spooky and moving pretty quickly. So if you get 1 or 2 shots at them, that's pretty good for the opportunity right now. But they'll settle as they get closer to October and the late October. They'll start pushing out, and you'll still get more opportunities at them. We've had some pretty good days on the water with catching trout. And like I say, primarily we've been throwing our burner shad in the down south lure. In the 2 main colors, at least in the last 6 or 7 days, it's been just dynamite for us. It's been bone diamond and white ice. And it doesn't matter if it was in the down south model, if it was in the knock and tail model, if it was in a mirror lure or marker 54 and theirs, coastal brew, any of those baits, they've all produced in that particular color or a version of that color, and it's been very good for us. So we've primarily this past few days primarily just throwing the bone diamond white ice, and it's produced top water action. In some areas have been okay, some areas it's been better than others, but we haven't really stuck with it that much and really kind of done anything with that. We've continued to really push with the original size down south and stay in that smaller size, that 4-inch, nothing really big that we've thrown there. So we've just kind of worked on that and stayed in that profile size. Double D's have been pretty good for us, and that profile's still been good. Another one that you probably could have thrown, we did not throw it, but if you had it, would be a soft dine. That profile size during these wild card days would be another one that'd be an excellent choice to see about that. Another bait too, especially with the top water baits starting to really kind of light up for us, the lele. The lele is a really good boat or a bait that's a smaller size than what your typical your Spook Junior is or the Mansfield Knocker is. So that's really, if you want to throw that, put you a couple of single hooks on there, because we do have a lot of floating grass. It's happening in some of these areas. So always got to take that into account. Make sure that you're incorporating the majors minor. Pay attention to your tides, because there's lots of water here, so it's really opening up areas that you typically would not be able to get into. Paul's Mod area, again, with our water levels being what they are because of that disturbance that's down in that lower Gulf, getting more water in our system opens up more of these back lake areas. And if you have the right kind of boat, you can go fish these areas, and it can be very productive for you. All these areas back in here, these are all interconnected lakes together. They'll take you all the way over to Mesquite, and they'll take, all the way back over to Allen's Bight. They're all back in here, and you got deep little pools in different areas. So if you've never really run this back here, wait till you have a really good tide high like we got right now, as long as you're paying attention to what's going on with that tide, because you don't want to put yourself in a little bit of jeopardy and get stuck. It's real easy to do. But there's some deep little pools that are back in these areas, and wading these areas back in here is really productive at times. Say a lot of bait in our system right now. There's tons and tons of bait, so we're working all these little areas on particular days. You can work all these areas back in here, and you can access them through the back lakes if you so choose, or you can come across the front out there in front of St. Joe shoreline, like you're heading down toward Allen's and some of these back lakes that are back in here. These little things really can light up for you. So they're typically not very deep back in some of those areas, but those redfish and trout like to get back in those little areas that's got deeper access to that water. So they'll hang around those particular areas. Like I say, ton of bait in the area, ton of bait in these back lakes, and all this stuff, like I say, is all interconnected, easy wading, not difficult at all. And with the extra water, it's affording us those opportunities to get back in there that we typically wouldn't get. As we get closer to our if you want to call it quote unquote fall season right now, we know September's not far from being done. We're going to be in October. Typically what'll happen is once we get our first little decent little cool front that pushes in here, it's going to push water out of here, unless we have some type of disturbance that's going to hang in the Gulf that'll stay around. But when that water starts to dump and starts to get out of here, some of those back lake areas will not be accessible, at least just with a regular boat. It'd be primarily just airboat or something, or the Poland skiffs, and that'll be about it. But, all the way down here to Allen's, you've got these little lakes that dump out into it. If you fish this area back, this whole shoreline in here, and then, of course, you got everything out on the front side of St. Joe and the Allen's Bight area that runs you all the way back down to the Mod area or the Long Reef Bend area. So you have tons of options, tons of fishing area, not anything that you can cover in over 2 or 3 days. So some of these areas, if you're not sure about, if you've never tried it, again, just dock your boat out on the front out there, make sure it's good and secure, and then just walk yourself into these back lakes. If you don't want to run into the back lakes, just walk into them, get you a topwater bait out, and start prospecting with that. If you got 2 or 3 people with you, somebody throw a plastic, somebody throw a topwater, somebody throw a double D, something like that, and you've got all the water columns covered. So, and then you can kind of start dictating what those fish really want. And get it narrowed down pretty quick. Color-wise, flavors have been just pretty well dictated by what the water clarity is. And like I say, we've not had big winds, so it's really been pretty clean for the most part. Maybe a little stained in some areas, but majority of it's been pretty clean. Smaller profile baits again. The white ice, bone diamond have been the most productive for us over the last several days. But we've thrown the big pop in there. Twisted Tea's been good for us. It still produces as well. Watermelon red in any of the flavors that you can get. And of course, again, what I mentioned earlier is, our top water's been pretty decent if we've stuck with it. We haven't tried it as far as sticking with it. Really haven't. Particular day, we'll have somebody that wants to just stick with it no matter what. But plastics have been producing for us the best. Again, 16th ounce jig heads, and just kind of rolling with those. Again, working those minors right now with the moon set and the moon rise. Of course, we're in the transition days again, and so if you're going to work the middle of the day, try to incorporate that major over or major under, should I say, and then just kind of see how your day progresses from there. Swan Lake shoreline, all the way down on this outside, all the way down to the point, the drop-off edge out here, and all this back in here has been pretty good for us. Now, granted, we've only fished 1 or 2 days back in these particular areas, but the days that we did fish there, they produced fish for us. Now, they weren't all great fish, but there was fish that were hanging in there. We're seeing lots of these 12 to 15 inchers that are around there trout-wise, and of course, we've seen plenty of redfish that are in that 18 to 22 range. And then, like I say, in some of these back lakes, you'll come across some of these little schools or pods of reds. It's depending on the size. They'll start grouping up by size. It's a pretty cool thing about that this time of year. If you find your little school of redfish cruising back in one of these back lakes or working a shoreline, typically whatever the size that you pull out of there, that's pretty much the size of all those fish that are going to be in that. So it's a neat little thing how they just do that naturally. But we've been working out on the outer edge out here on the harder packed sand side, been working the drop on those, working around the islands, working the mouths of that. Plenty of bait in the area. You got the oyster farm that's just right out there in front of Swan Lake. I've seen a few boats that's been anchored up fishing around that just structure-wise, but we've been primarily, like I say, we're always wading these areas back in here. We can't wade that just, again, with the amount of water that we have in our system right now. It just prevents that. But some of these areas like Swan, when you get that extra water in there, it kind of lights them up. So these little islands all around here become very productive. Fish kind of hang up and push up closer to that. Just remember, whenever you get a lot of extra water, you start fishing closer to your shorelines or your islands in those areas, because as that water rises, those fish move in, and as the water drops, those fish will pull out. It's just an easy rule of thumb just to remember those types of things like that. Little bitty things can make a big difference for you in your fishing day. If you're trying to fish the same way every time, no matter what the tide is, some days your days will not be very productive and kind of long for you. So always incorporate the little things. Think about the little things like that, because it does produce for you. Say, we've just been working the back shoreline, been working down the mouths of these things. This is where we've been throwing probably a little bit more top water action, double D water in here as well, because of the amount of water that's in here. So we've been in that waist deep, so it works pretty good, because the double D, if you've thrown it, it's an ascension bait. So if you don't have enough water underneath it, you're going to constantly get hung up in grass. And you may want to put single hooks on those as well, just because the amount of floating grass that's in some of these areas. So, and that along with your top water baits as well. So just something to consider. Like I say, outside of the top water, we're primarily just throwing our plastics, working these all back in here, working the edges, working off the edges just a little bit, and just locating fish. And once we kind of get into them a little bit, we'll just hang there and fish them until they either stop biting or have moved on, or moved on down the shoreline, then we'll continue to move again. Like I say, our minor settings have been pretty good. The major unders have been okay. They haven't been great producers. But again, we're in our transition days, so this is where you have a bunch of different size and profile baits, color-wise, that you want to have in your box during this time frame. Because, like I say, the wild card days can be just that. Some days can be good, average, great, poor, terrible, whatever. And we've been fortunate that our winds have not just been howling, knocking the hair off your head. So it's been nice to have light winds to start out with, and it'll just kind of gradually build depending on how late you fish. Maybe early afternoon you might be around a 10 or 12 mile an hour wind, which has been super nice. Because if you run out of the Copano Bay Bridge and you're having to run across, burn the shoreline down there through Copano Ridge and Valley and all that stuff, then it can get kind of hairy when it comes shooting across that little bit deeper water. So anyway, just take all that stuff into consideration as you move into this upcoming week. Keep an eye on that disturbance that's down in the lower Gulf by the Yucatan, because that will dictate some stuff to us. We'll see if anything really transforms from it. We're already seeing the effects with the more water. I'm sure we'll have some rain chances later in the week as well. So enjoy your time out on the water. Get out as much as you can and be as safe as you can.